Hello everyone. We are in the past simple tense chapter, and we are going to start the lesson, be sentences, was, were. This lesson deals with sentences, which are using the verb to be, was, and were. At this point of this course, I guess you know that we are going to learn positive sentences, negative sentences, yes no questions, WH questions, and questions about the subject. Before learning this lesson, we must be familiar with the material of the previous lesson, be, was and were. Let's start. Positive sentences. The sentence starts with the subject, followed by was, or were, depending on the subject. Then comes the rest of the sentence. David was at home last night. David is he, therefore we use was. The children were at home last night. The children are they, so we use were. Negative sentences. The sentence starts with the subject, followed by was, or were, depending on the subject. Then, not, followed by the rest of the sentence. The term that expresses negation is, was not, or, were not. The shortcut of was not, is wasn't, and the shortcut of were not, is weren't. I, he, she, and it, get the was not, or the wasn't, and you, we, and they, get the were not, or the weren't. David was not at home last night. Or, David wasn't at home last night. David is he, that's why we are using was not, or, wasn't. The children were not at home last night. Or, the children weren't at home last night. The children are they, so we use were not, or, weren't. Yes no questions. The question starts with was, or were, depending on the subject. Then comes the subject, followed by the rest of the question. Was David at home last night? You know by now that David is he, and therefore we use was. Were the children at home last night? You also know that the children are they, so we use were. WH questions. The question always starts with a WH question, followed by was, or were, depending on the subject. Then comes the subject, followed by the rest of the question. Where was David last night? When were the children at home? Nothing else to explain. Questions about the subject. Question about the subject will always start with who, or what, depending on the subject. You should know by now that if the subject is human, the question will begin with who. If the subject is not human, the question will begin with what. Example for subject, in which we use who. David, the kids, my teacher, mother, and so on. All of them are human. Example for subject, in which we use what. The dog, this chair, my car, your TV, etc. Not human. After the who, or the what, we use was. We always use was in the question about the subject. Never were. Then comes the rest of the sentence. Who was at home last night? That is all we need to know. These are all the rules. Let's just follow with some more examples. Positive. Dan was a good pupil last year. Dan is equal to he, therefore, we use was, in this sentence. Negative. Dan was not a good pupil last year. Or, Dan wasn't a good pupil last year. Yes no question. Was Dan a good pupil last year? WH question. When was Dan a good pupil? Question about the subject. Who was a good pupil last year? Pay attention. In questions about the subject, we always use was. Never were. Positive. Dan and Rachel were good pupils last year. The subject, Dan and Rachel, is equal to they, therefore, we use were, in this sentence. Negative. Dan and Rachel were not good pupils last year. Or, Dan and Rachel weren't good pupils last year. Yes, no question. Were Dan and Rachel good pupils last year? WH question. When were Dan and Rachel good pupils? Question about the subject. Who was a good pupil last year? I repeat. In questions about the subject we always use was. Never were. 2 more examples and we done. Positive. The pencil was on the table a minute ago. The pencil is equal to it, therefore, we use was, in this sentence. Negative. The pencil was not on the table a minute ago. Or, the pencil wasn't on the table a minute ago. Yes, no question. Was the pencil on the table a minute ago? WH question. Where was the pencil a minute ago? Question about the subject. What was on the table a minute ago? Notice that we used the WH question what, and not who, because the subject here, the pencil, is an object. It is not human. Positive. My brothers were in America last week. The subject, my brothers, is equal to they, therefore, we use were, in this sentence. Negative. My brothers were not in America last week. Or, my brothers weren't in America last week. Yes, no question. Were my brothers in America last week? WH question. When were my brothers in America? Question about the subject. Who was in America last week? No need to say, here also we use was. That's all. Now is the time to practice. Use our homepage to practice, improve and test yourself online. You can enter the website via the link in the description area below the video. As usual, we ask you again to give us a share, like, and to subscribe to our videos. Any feedback will help us improve our lessons. Now enter our homepage via the link in the description area, or enter the next lesson, irregular verbs, via the link at the top of the screen. The Grammarland team wishes you lots of fun and success.